Marthasville, TBOA, the birth of Atlanta. Ricky James had just turned 17. He grew up alongside with Charlie Johnson. Their birthdays are just a week apart. In fact, they're brothers, but at the time, they didn't know it. However, for some reason, they grew a tight bond. I mean, one tighter than that of Batman and Robin. So I kept on reading. For the last 5 years, twice a month, Ricky and Charlie was molested by their uncles. It was 3 of them. Uncle Billy Bob, Lil Jesse, and Uncle Eddie Lou. But today, all of that would come to an end. It was just a little past 8 o'clock. The sunset was amazing. Uncle Billy Bob and Uncle Eddie Lou held down Ricky James while Lil Jesse undressed and prepared himself. This was always right after leaving Charlie's room. As sad as it sounds, this was the norm up until now. Ricky James was short, just a little over 5 feet. However, Charlie was 6'4", damn near 250 pounds. So when the door flew off the hinges, his shadow damn near darkened the room. Put that gun down! Put that gun down, nigga! Nigga, I said put that goddamn gun down! Uncle Eddie Lou said. Charlie replied, let him go right now, you dirty bastard. I said, let him go, as he raised the Denix Colt Dragon 6-shot revolver. Right now. Ricky James stood up with tears rushing down his face. When he pushed Lil Jesse's chest, Uncle Lou's eyeballs protruded. Uncle Jesse, he swallowed his chewing tobacco. All of them looked as if they had seen a ghost. Ricky James then walked over to Charlie and took the gun from him. Hand me that gun, Charlie. He then turned and walked towards his uncle. Once he raised the pistol, he fired. Uncle Billy Bob's head exploded from a single round. It was like a pumpkin splatter. With the second shot, he collapsed Lil Jesse's chest. You could stick your fist through the bullet hole and touch the floor. Uncle Eddie Lou turned and started to run, but without his boots on, he just slipped after every attempt. Ricky James shot him in the back of his neck. His body jolted. Then all of a sudden it went to a limp. The bullet damn near decapitated his head from his body. 3 inches of skin was the only thing that kept his head attached. What in the hell is going on? Ricky James' father yelled as he came running to the top of the steps, but he was never to make it through the threshold of the door. Ricky James sunk a bullet between his eyes, just below his forehead. His mother yelled frantically, but was silenced within the very next round. From over 30 feet away, in the master's bedroom, she died.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name.
Charlie followed Ricky to his grandmother's room, where she lay lifeless with the Bible laying on her chest. Her decomposed body sent goosebumps all over Ricky. Charlie just looked. Charlie's mother, Bertha, extremely beautiful, not your ordinary slave, came running, but she fainted from the sight of all the blood. She fainted from the sight of all the blood.
Mama, you okay?
10 years later, the birth of a criminal can't be foreseen. Some people are born criminals. Ricky James and Charlie Johnson grew into great ones. The best of their time. You see, Ricky James killed his entire family. They were now replaced by the slaves he owned. He actually owned his brother. By killing his family, he gained control of the estates, all the property. And it was huge, 2,500 acres. Now, Ricky was raised by Miss Bertha, Charlie Johnson's mom. So hatred was never birthed. It was never taught. Nothing. Ricky James burned down the big house to a crisp. Everything in it. They then started working on the first black city in Georgia. They called it Marthasville, named after Martha, a slave that taught both of them how to read and write. Okay, one day Charlie and the gang sat at the kitchen table and came up with this master plan. A plan that would give blacks the same old rights as them white people. They first needed tools, so they went out and stole them. Ricky James and the gang rode to nearby cities and hired the town's carpenters to help them build. They needed cattle, and cattle cost money, and they were on a mission. A mission to build a city. Okay, now, the Brinks brothers own the biggest saloon in the state of Alabama. The Brinks family also owned more slaves than anyone in the South. This was a honey hole when it comes to money. They were Ricky's father's biggest customer.
This was Sin City. Sin motherfucking City.
Ricky James' father sold young girls from the age of 12 to 25 to the Brinks brothers to be used as sex slaves. His father and uncles would ride throughout the night until they found a family with a girl or girls. They would kidnap them and vanish into the night, not leaving a trace. Okay, Ricky told one of the Brinks brothers that they had 20 girls to sell. His mouth dropped. He couldn't believe it. 20 girls for $5,000?
You mean to tell me that you got 20 girls, all of them purty now, for $5,000? Come on now. We want them.
Ricky James and the gang waited for hours alongside the only pathway leaving the Brinks brothers' property. They sat there waiting patiently. They finally came cutting through the woods. It was pitch black. But they wasn't coming to get those girls that Ricky had lied about. They walked right up on Ricky, Charlie, and the rest of the gang. Gunshots echoed throughout the woods. They never had a chance to retaliate. All 8 of the men traveling for the Brinks brothers family were killed. They were on their way to make a large purchase for the Brinks family with a total of $50,000 in cash. $50,000. Ricky James and the gang hit the jackpot. Okay, believe it or not, this is the birth and untold story of Atlanta, Georgia. I was digging through my great-grandfather's box in the attic of my grandfather's house when I came up with this notebook and this story in it. My great aunts were exceptionally smart. Hell, all of my cousins are literature teachers. Most of them at least work for the school board. I guess that's the reason why I like to write. And this story was written in one of those notebooks that I found up in that attic. Ricky James and the gang approached the Chattahoochee River from the Alabama side. They found a shallow crossing point and proceeded to the Johnson Brothers plantation. The Johnson Brothers, by far, had the biggest and strongest slaves man's ever seen. It was 5 of the Johnson Brothers. Willie was the oldest of the brothers, but Danny Boy ran the family business. He was the youngest. Oh, Freddie, he was the hothead of all of them. He was the youngest, just 22 years old. He stood about 6'5", damn near 275 pounds. Then there was Lil Pete and Tommy, both short and skinny, and loved to drink. All together, they owned the first railroad company in the South. Back then, there were only 2 things that could weaken a man: whiskey and a woman. Ricky James and the gang sat around a campfire thinking. They went over plan after plan. Then they came up with this. And man, I can tell you, it was a good one. They waited until Sunday. Lil Pete was the pastor at the church, which was built on the Johnson brothers' property. The gang watched them from over 2 weeks, night and day. They staked out about 100 yards away in secluded areas all around the Johnson brothers' property. Okay, now the Johnson's brother routine, man, it was pretty easy. It was simple. The Johnson's brothers all went to church on Sunday. When they got out of church, they had their family dinner. Then after the family dinner, oh man, them boys got drunk. And when the Johnson's brothers drink on that Sunday, they drink a lot. I mean, these white boys here, man, they were pretty cool, man. I mean, they even got drunk with their slaves. And this type of practice from white folk was unheard of. Okay, now let me tell y'all about the gang. They were 5 men deep. All of them they rode black horses. It was Ricky James, Charlie Johnson. It was JJ and Smokey. They also were brothers too. Both of them came from under the hills, the Natchez slave market down in Mississippi. Ricky James, ironically, he picked them out himself, along with 5 others on his first trip to buy slaves with his father when he was only 8 years old. Then there was Ronnie, the oldest of the gang. He came from Junction City, Georgia. This was a slave camp full of runaway slaves that had been recaptured. And what I can tell you, homeboy, is by far they received the worst of the beatings of all slaves. They were often sold cheap because most of them had broken arms and broken legs. Ronnie himself, oh man, Mr. Ronnie there, he's missing an eye and walked with a limp, but was a real marksman. I mean, he could shoot an apple off the top of a bull's horn from 100 yards away. That cat Ronnie boy, he's a bad man. And when I say bad man, I mean bad man. Check this out, y'all. It was high noon. The gang tied all their horses up except for the one Ricky James rode in a secluded part of the trail. Ricky tailed the gang on his horse while the gang walked with 2 big boxes chained together, but they weren't locked. They were loaded with whiskey and weapons. They slowly made their way to the front entrance of the Johnson's brothers plantation.
Hold your horse and them niggas,
Lil Pete said as he cocked his gun.
State your goddamn business or lose your life.
Calm down, boys. My name is Ricky James, but everyone calls me the Whiskey Man, Ricky James said as he tilted his head. This was also the command for his horse Tricky to kneel. I got the best whiskey this side of the Mississippi.
You got real hoots, boy? If so, tie them niggas up there over there to that tree and your horse over there in the horse holder and come on inside. Hold up there for a minute, boy. Rick, you say your name, you say your name here. Open up one of them boxes there. Pass me 2-3 of them bottles.
Ricky James just looked at Charlie and winked his eye. Ricky tied up his horse and chained the gang to a tree. But once again, he didn't lock it. Then he followed Lil Pete inside. An hour or so must have passed.
This some damn good shit,
Freddie said. His brother Tommy agreed. About 45 minutes passed. Ricky James went outside to get more whiskey and to inform the gang to come in. About 30 minutes after he was back on the inside. By this time, the brothers, oh man, they were sloppy drunk. The gang then unchained themselves. Ronnie kicked the front door open and they all rushed in.
Who the hell is that?
One of the Johnson brothers yelled. It was the gang. Ricky James drew both his pistols, killing Tommy and Freddie at the same time. Charlie shot next, killing Danny Boy. Willie Johnson, he tried his best to run, but in a drunken stupor, he was useless. Smokey just toyed with him before he took his life. It was a one-sided gunfight. I mean, the Johnson brothers, they didn't stand a chance. There were a total of 18 men killed. The only lives that were spared were the women and children. Ricky James, Charlie Johnson, JJ, Smokey, and Ronnie gathered them all up, explained to them the reasons for their actions, then headed back to Marthasville, along with 250 more men and women. Ricky James and the gang had taken over the railroad, and for the next 27 years, all blacks were welcome. That is, up until they were ambushed by some asshole Confederates. Shit, but by this time, Ricky James and the gang had gotten too old to fight. They had been tipped off about the ambush, but there was little that they could do about it. So when the Confederates came, they all stood back to backs against a giant oak tree, reinforced with plyboards, with pistols in both hands, along with more weapons and ammunition to the side. They fired until the last man fell, which was Ronnie. He must have killed 30 to 40 men before he was finally killed by a bullet to the back of his head. Okay, now, I'm gonna tell y'all straight up. This was the gun battle history don't want you to know about. A few years later, an asshole named Sherman set the city on fire during the war. He left over 800 slaves behind, if not more. So who do you think built the city of Atlanta back up after the fire? Now, I really tripped out when I read this. But then I started thinking, shit, it's a lot of black people with money in Atlanta. I mean, it's a lot of them. So as far as today, me personally, I think that Ricky James and Charlie Johnson are responsible for the birth of Atlanta. The ATL as we know of it today, also known as Hot Atlanta. Oh man, thanks a lot, man. Thanks everyone for listening, man. Check me out, I'll be at it again. I got some more shit coming up, man. What's up, D-Watts, man? Tell me about this shit right here, D-Watt. Tell me about it, man.